pequeño solía pintarme con cal para decirle a mi mamá que quería estar blanca. Y de hecho, también siempre había querido ser blanca, pero actualmente pues me di cuenta que la piel morena es bonita y sobre todo que sí, hay personas que se ven bien incluso con su color. Como los españoles esclavizaron a nuestro país, pensaron que los negros deberíamos seguir siendo esclavos, que los negros somos feos, que los negros somos malos, que los negros, etcétera, un montón de discriminación.
Entonces, si nosotros como cultura, como etnia, no existimos, obvio que tampoco el gobierno tiene una responsabilidad presupuestal y eso es lo que queremos, ¿verdad?
Me parece bien que estén fomentando eso a los jóvenes porque pues desafortunadamente vamos perdiendo nuestras tradiciones y no sabemos de dónde venimos.
Lo que falta más educación, más culturas afros, darle a conocer los diferentes tipos de culturas que tenemos.
They say there are 12 million undocumented aliens. They're frightened. Mexicans becoming politically active, economically strong. Now, they take little Mexican babies that were born in America, send them back, deport them, and send the mother back with them if the mother wants to go. If the mother was undocumented, the child was born in America. Well, you say, okay, what should we do? See, you want to punish the ones who come across the border, but I don't read where you're punishing the manufacturers that use cheap Mexican labor. I don't see you being hard on corporations that have fled the country and put manufacturing in the hands of cheap labor overseas. Millions of manufacturing jobs have been lost, over 7 million manufacturing jobs by ceding manufacturers to cheap labor markets overseas. That's traitorous to the country. See, you got to call it like it is. Is money more valuable than the sovereignty of a nation? See, this is our America now. We got to say something about this. Now the borders have to be sealed because you don't have employment for the millions that you do have. But if you seal the border, you should make a track for everyone that's here to become a citizen. Now, why do I say that? See, you got to go to the root. That's what radical means. Go to the root of the problem. I wish, do you have upstairs that map of what Mexico looked like before white folks took it? Give me a microphone. I want to go down here. Testing. Oh, yeah. Yeah. This was Mexico. See? Texas was a part of it. New Mexico was a part of it. Nevada, Arizona, California, part of Colorado, part of Wyoming, part of Utah. That was Mexico. Well, how did we get it? I use we, but it ain't me. It ain't us. We're not a part of the crooks that belonged to Adam, the first crook. But look at this. Here in Texas, this was Mexico. Over here, Louisiana, right? Mississippi, Alabama. There's some slave states all up in there. So Mexico wanted to populate some of the northern part of Mexico, so they allowed the Americans to come in. See, that's how it starts. Come in. You let them come in before, and you lost everything, right? All right, you let them in. So the whites came in, then they began to bring their cousins in, their uncles. Before you know it, they wanted to bring slavery in. The Mexicans did not approve of slavery. What? Mexicans didn't approve of slavery? No, they didn't. So the whites, in order to get around that law, they called them indentured servants for life. Now, let's see if we can start a war. See, that's how it happens. You got to understand the modus operandi of the enemy. He comes in, he makes trouble. Then he starts a war. Then he takes what he had in his mind all along by superior military strength. How did we get Puerto Rico? How did we get Cuba? How did we get the Philippines? A lie was told. A ship got blown up in Havana Harbor. The ship was called the Maine. And that led to the Spanish-American War. And after America won the war, Cuba was ours, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. So a war started over here. And Americans won. They went all the way down to Mexico City. In the treaty that was signed, I think it's called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Texas was taken. Then for $15 million, they got all of this. 15 million. So the Mexicans that were living here, you could stay. Isn't that nice? Or you could retreat below the border, but the border of America and Mexico now was the Rio Grande. Now here comes some Mexicans. You open the door. This is the land of promise. This is the land of opportunity. So they come. Well, that's good. They're hard workers. They work in the fields. Back-breaking work. But they do it. And they've made America their home. Close the door. But give them all a chance to be citizens. Now wait, don't use them. See the path to citizenship. Join the army. Hey, 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 hey. What the hell is that? See, you just like ancient Rome. You conquer people. You don't want to fight for your own country, so you bring immigrants in, and the pathway to citizenship is you put them in the army, then send them to die, and if they live, then they can say, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of slavery.
So the minute that the Union took over in 1861, Black newspapers began to publish their truth, their story. It was a powerful moment. Let me just start with a story that nobody knows. I am Teresa Van Hoy from St. Mary's University.
After the Civil War, St. Mary's history professor Teresa Van Hoy says Black Union soldiers helped to liberate Mexico from French control.
To my enormous surprise, one of the topics that mattered enormously to African Americans in Louisiana was the fate of Mexican Americans in Texas along the Rio Grande. They were very concerned that the Confederates were attacking Mexican Americans along the Rio Grande, and they were very concerned that the French were attacking Mexicans on the northern border of Mexico. And so they are rooting for Cortina and Mexican Americans to throw off these twin oppressors. In 1865, so 4 years later, they snuck across to Mexico to help Mexicans and Mexican Americans overthrow the French. They won. The French were an amazing fighting force. This was a great risk to their lives and a beautiful moment of solidarity for which they've never gotten any credit, not in Mexico and not in the US.
As seen from these pictures from the Library of Congress, the aid pointed to a deep-rooted camaraderie.
Everybody's heard about Canada being the land of freedom. Everybody's heard about the Underground Railroad and heading north and following the North Star. But very few people have understood that enslaved people in Texas were heading for Mexico and freedom. Mexico was freedom, and Mexico protected them the minute they crossed the border.
Van Hoy says before slavery ended in America, slaves would flee to Mexico by following trails left in the sand by Mexican wagoneers who traded goods.
Mexico was one of the last countries in Latin America to formally recognize its Afro-descent population. In 2015, for the first time in 200 years, the Mexican government did a formal survey of the country's Afro-Mexican population. The results of the 2015 intercensal survey showed that 1.2% of Mexicans identify as Afro-Mexican, a number totaling almost 1.4 million. Another 500,000 identified as partially Afro-descendant, bringing the total to a collective 1.7%. The region with the highest concentration of Afro-Mexicans is Costa Chica, which includes the southern states of Oaxaca and Guerrero. The second largest black population is in the state of Veracruz. Coajinicuilapa is the town in Guerrero with the highest black population and is also home to Mexico's first museum dedicated to Afro-Mexican history and culture.
In the early years of the Spanish colonial period, from 1580 to 1650, the Spanish trafficked roughly 250,000 Africans to Mexico from Senegal, Gambia, Guinea, Congo, Angola, and Mozambique.
In the early 1600s, Mexico had the largest enslaved African population in the Americas. Naturally, this resulted in interracial offspring between African, Spanish, and indigenous populations.
Enslaved Africans worked largely in agriculture, silver mines, and in sugar plantations. This valuable contribution played a key role in Mexico's economic growth.
Enslaved Africans who escaped captivity formed communities across Mexico known as palenques, the Spanish word for settlements of escaped slaves. The most famous palenque in Mexico was established in Veracruz in 1570 by Gaspar Yanga, a former slave from Gabon. It lasted 40 years before the Spanish attacked, and Yanga was subsequently hailed as a Mexican national hero.
Historically, Afro-Mexicans played a pivotal role in the Mexican War of Independence. Many black and Afro-descent Mexicans took up arms and fought for freedom.
One of the most famous Afro-Mexicans in history was revolutionary leader General Vicente Guerrero, who to date is Mexico's only president of African descent.
Despite Afro-Mexicans' economic, cultural, political, and military contributions to Mexico, the Afro-Mexican community today remains marginalized and largely invisible. They are underrepresented and excluded from the political arena.
When the Afro-Mexican community is acknowledged, it's usually with a historical reference rather than in recognition of the community today. In 2005, the Mexican Postal Service, Cepomex, released a stamp in commemoration of the 1940s Afro-Mexican cartoon character Memín Pinguín, which immediately received a heavy backlash from civil rights groups who contested the caricaturish features of the character.
Nowadays, the Afro-Mexican community has comparatively restricted access to adequate education, living conditions, and professional opportunities.
Primary occupations among the community include fishing, agriculture, and domestic work. 76% of Afro-Mexicans are considered to be lower or lower middle class. Despite the fact that Mexico produces a large amount of TV dramas, popular across the whole of Latin America, representation of black people tends to be scarce, and when black characters are portrayed, they tend to conform to negative or humiliating stereotypes.
However, in spite of the negative, there have been plenty of signs of progress. The 2015 census was a landmark event in terms of recognition for the Afro-Mexican community.
The following year, governmental anti-discrimination body, CONPRED, launched the campaign Soy Afro, I Am Afro, designed to raise awareness of the Afro-Mexican community and foster a sense of pride.
There have been several organizations and projects in recent years whose aim has been to gain recognition for the Afro-Mexican population.
Mexico neGRo is the country's most recognized organization to advocate for Afro-Mexican rights. It was founded in 1997 by Sergio Peñalosa Perez and works to champion black social and political rights in Mexico. La Tercera Raíz, the third root, was a governmental program that collated in-depth research on the history of Afro-descent people in Mexico. Huella Negra is an initiative dedicated to raising visibility for Afro-descendant Mexicans and eradicating the negative and racist stereotypes that beleaguer the community, such as that black people are aggressive, unintelligent, and lazy.
At the turn of the 19th century, it was clear that the Americans' hunger for territory had not been sated. The Louisiana Purchase, which saw a massive stretch of land sold by the French to the United States, all but confirmed that further ingress into native inhabited lands was inevitable. In the aftermath of their victory in the Northwest Indian War, over 600,000 American pioneers would settle in the newly established states of Kentucky and Ohio, as well as the territory of Indiana, land once dominated by native tribes. Disunited and outnumbered, the natives of the frontier were direly outmatched. Despite this, Tecumseh never gave up his grand ambitions to retake native territories. As fate would have it, it would actually be his brother who would spark the movement that would snowball into the creation of his great confederacy. This man was Lalawethika, meaning he who makes a loud noise. He had always been the black sheep of the family, having never become a great warrior like his brothers. A freak accident had taken out his eye when he was young, and he spent the majority of his youth as a perpetually drunk good-for-nothing. In the year 1805, everything changed. One day, Lalawethika was smoking in his wigwam when suddenly his body seized up and he fell into a trance. His stupor was so deep that those around him thought he had died, yet soon he awoke as a changed man. Lalawethika told everyone that he had received a vision from the Great Spirit, in which he had seen his people led onto a path of doom, and was now convinced that the Great Spirit had sent him on a mission to purify native culture for their salvation. He took on a new name, Tenskwatawa, the Open Door. In time, he became known to his people as the Prophet. The Prophet soon began spreading his teachings amongst the Shawnee. He preached that his people were the Great Spirit's original creations. In contrast, the white people were children of the evil spirit that grew from the scum of the great waters. As such, natives bore an innate responsibility to keep their way of life pure of colonial influence. To this endeavor, he denounced intermarriage between natives and whites, which had become commonplace in the last few decades. He spoke out against alcoholism and forbade the evils of drink. He renounced European clothing and other such innovations brought to his lands since first contact, mandating his followers wear the traditional garments of their people. In the winter of 1805, a familiar calamity struck the Old Northwest. Native communities were once more afflicted by an outbreak of smallpox, leaving many communities crippled or entirely depopulated. Disease had sadly become old news to the natives by this point, who often coped by blaming their misfortune on witches, who supposedly were sinister herbalists capable of brewing malicious potions and spreading illness. Thus, in the spring of 1806, the Prophet became a major ringleader in a witch hunt that spread across the Old Northwest, a hunt he used to further spread the influence of his religious movement. Tenskwatawa hounded down all those who denounced him and all who embraced the ways of the white man. Under his watch, Christian natives and chieftains friendly to the Americans were captured, tortured, and killed, all in the name of rooting allegedly evil witches out of native communities. The Prophet soon had a growing following, not just among the Shawnee, but many neighboring tribes as well. The growing unrest in the native Northwest began to make American settlers on the frontier uneasy. One such man was William Henry Harrison, governor of the Indiana Territory. He had fought in the Northwest Indian Wars a decade earlier, and a religious uprising centered around resisting colonialism was a threat to the settlers in his jurisdiction. Seeking to pacify the movement, Harrison denounced Tenskwatawa to the Delawares with conviction, saying, "Who is this pretended prophet who dares to speak in the name of the great Creator? Is he more wise or virtuous than you are yourselves, that he should convey to you the orders of your God? To affirm his spiritual powers, the prophet told his followers of a day of black sun. He was correct. By accurately predicting a solar eclipse, Tenskwatawa had proven his power in the eyes of his followers. In 1808, the prophet joined forces with Tecumseh. Together, the two brothers founded a village upon the confluence of the Wabash and Tippecanoe rivers. The old chieftain, Little Turtle, who had fought at Fallen Timbers, warned Tecumseh that he was settling on the lands of the Miami, to which Tecumseh replied devoutly that he was settling on native lands. The brothers' village came to be known as Prophetstown, and would serve as the staging point for their pan-native resistance movement. In the following years, people from all over the Old Northwest filtered into Prophetstown, drawn to Tenskwatawa's teachings and Tecumseh's reputation as a warrior. The community grew quickly from a small village into a bustling multi-tribal township, a hub of Native American cultural and political activity. In the end, it was Tecumseh who assumed the ultimate chieftaincy of their budding community. Tecumseh soon set out from Prophetstown on a mission to convince the tribes of the Old Northwest that resistance, not assimilation, was the key to their survival, and to build a confederacy that stretched across the American frontier. The chieftain traveled from village to village, dazzling people with his charismatic orations and legendary strength. Chieftains of the Ojibwe, Wyandots, Fox, Sauk, Odawas, Kickapoos, Lenape, Miami, Seneca, Onondaga, and Delawares all joined his cause, as of course did the Shawnee. But Tecumseh was not all honeyed words. He imposed himself harshly, threatening death to any chiefs who collaborated with the Americans. Meanwhile, as more tribes joined Tecumseh's cause, more and more natives migrated into Prophetstown, which had evolved into the center of the Native Confederacy, a swelling city-state that provided a powerful buffer against white settlers' westward expansion. The rapid growth of Tecumseh's Confederacy, its active anti-colonial rhetoric, and its existence within lands claimed by the United States put it on an inevitable collision course with the Americans. The catalyst of this confrontation came in 1809, when Governor Harrison of Indiana coerced select chieftains of the Delaware, Potawatomi, and Kickapoo to sign the Treaty of Fort Wayne, which ceded a 12,000 square kilometer piece of land along the Wabash River to the United States government. This treaty infuriated Tecumseh, as it flew right in the face of his core belief that land belonged collectively to all natives. He saw it as theft, a plain and simple attempt to extort weak chieftains whose land had been made poor by white settlers. In August of 1810, Tecumseh met with Harrison face to face outside the governor's colonial estate, and the two engaged in a heated parley. Tecumseh insisted that native land could not be bought or sold, unless done so collectively by all the tribes acting as one, and that the land ceded to the Americans in the recent treaties still rightfully belonged to the natives. Harrison replied that individual tribes were free to make treaties with the United States, but Tecumseh's confederacy was not recognized, nor did the local tribes welcome his interference in their affairs. The back-and-forth debate inspired a passionate reply from Tecumseh and his most iconic quote, "Sell a country? Why not sell the air, the great sea, as well as the earth? Did not the Great Spirit make them all for the use of his children?" Tensions soon grew between the two parties. Harrison was quick to point out that the Shawnee themselves had taken land from the Miamis, so what right had they to dictate the affairs of other tribes? If the tribes were all one nation, as Tecumseh claimed, why did the Great Spirit not have them all speak one language? Tecumseh lost his temper, declaring that everything Harrison said was a lie, and that the Americans had cheated the native peoples. He brandished his tomahawk at the governor, prompting Harrison to draw his saber and point it at Tecumseh. A tense standoff ensued, but neither side attacked. Harrison brought the meeting to an end, and demanded Tecumseh and his followers leave. Tecumseh soon realized he had been wrong to threaten Harrison, and the two met once more the following day, this time at the Shawnees' camp. This time Tecumseh opted for a more diplomatic route. He offered the United States alliance against Britain, but only if they would renounce their claim to native lands purchased in recent treaties. Harrison replied cordially, saying he would present Tecumseh's terms to the president, but did not expect the natives' conditions to be met. To this, Tecumseh replied regretfully, "I hope the great chief will give up this land. He is so far off, he may sit still and drink his wine, whilst you and I will have to fight it out." Harrison was impressed by the integrity of his enemy. He remarked that, if it were not for the vicinity of the United States, he would perhaps be the founder of an empire. In 1811, Tecumseh travelled southwards to present-day Alabama. The natives of that region were known to the Americans as the 5 civilized tribes, due to their more positive predisposition to adopting European practices. Tecumseh's goal was to extend his alliance along the entirety of the American frontier, but he met fierce resistance in the south. The tribes there rejected his calls for unity more often than not, instead preferring to abide by the treaties they had signed with the United States. This is exemplified in an exchange between Tecumseh and Pushmataha, a chieftain of the Choctaws. Pushmataha stood firm against Tecumseh, delivering a pithy statement. "These white Americans give us fair exchange, their cloth, their guns, their tools, implements, and other things which the Choctaws need but do not make. It will be seen that the whites and Indians in this section are living on friendly and mutually beneficial terms." Tecumseh delivered a vehement reply. "Where today are the Pequot? Where are the Narragansett, the Mochican, the Poccanet, and other powerful tribes of our people? They have vanished before the avarice and oppression of the white man. Sleep not longer, O Choctaws and Chickasaws. Will not the bones of our dead be ploughed up, and their graves turned into ploughed fields?" Unfortunately, his words fell on deaf ears, and the Choctaws refused to join his cause. Nevertheless, Tecumseh did find limited success in the south. In September, he rode into the Muskogee town of Tuckabatchee. There he delivered another impassioned speech about the unity of natives and resistance against the white man. Thousands of warriors raised their tomahawks and cheered, but one old chieftain remained silent. One story claims that Tecumseh stalked over to this chieftain and declared that he would march to Fort Detroit, stamp his foot into the earth, and shake down every house in Tuckabatchee to prove that he had been chosen by the Great Spirit. Tecumseh then ventured back northwards, and sure enough, on December 16, 1811, the New Madrid earthquake rocked the southern United States, and every house in Tuckabatchee was shaken to its foundations. Many interpreted this as the coming of Tecumseh's prophecy and proof they should join his confederacy. Henceforth, a significant amount of Muskogees declared themselves for Tecumseh, a faction which became known as the Red Sticks. Meanwhile, in Indiana, Governor Harrison was aware that Tecumseh was away from Prophetstown, which was currently under the administration of Tenskwatawa. Harrison knew that Tecumseh was the main military power in the Native Confederacy, and his absence made this the right time to strike. Harrison's goal was to conquer Prophetstown, thereby ripping the heart out of the growing Confederacy and eliminating the threat of a native invasion of Indiana before it could begin. Harrison sent the Prophet an ultimatum. All Potawatomis, Kickapoos, and Winnebagos were to be expelled from Prophetstown. All warriors who had launched raids upon United States citizens had to be surrendered, and all goods and horses stolen from settlers had to be returned. These terms served to effectively disband the Native Confederacy, and unsurprisingly, were unilaterally rejected. On September 20th, 1811, Harrison marched northwards with an army of 1,000 men. Comprising this force were 325 Army regulars and 625 volunteers, largely from Kentucky and the Indiana Territory. The militia was made up primarily of infantrymen, but also featured mounted sharpshooters and dragoons. The principal weapon used by this expeditionary force was the Model 1795 Springfield flintlock musket, a firearm capable of discharging 3 rounds per minute. The army stopped at present-day Terre Haute, Indiana, and constructed a stockade named Fort Harrison, which would be a staging point for their upcoming assault. Within their town, the Prophet's warriors numbered anywhere from 500 to 700, divided into tribal contingents of Winnebagos, Kickapoos, Potawatomis, Wyandots and Shawnees, each numbering about 125 men. Most of the natives were armed with British Brown Bess muskets and carried knives, tomahawks and war clubs. By November 6th, the Americans had advanced out of Fort Harrison and made camp on a high ridge around 1,000 yards west of Prophetstown. Before he had headed south, Tecumseh had warned his brother not to engage in combat, for he did not want open war before his confederacy was fully mobilized. Despite this, he was not present, and the warriors of Prophetstown looked to Tenskwatawa for guidance. The Prophet had made overtures for peace that afternoon, but this was a fruitless endeavour, as Harrison could not accept any terms short of the abandonment of Prophetstown and the dispersal of its inhabitants. Meanwhile, the natives had become deeply uneased by the army at their doorstep, and many itched for confrontation. The most popular story claims the Winnebago faction denounced any attempt at peace and demanded Tenskwatawa send them into battle. Thus, the Prophet sought a vision with the Great Spirit and returned to his warriors with a plan: to assassinate Governor Harrison, thereby beheading the American army and making them unable to fight. The Winnebagos demanded that the attack had to be that night. Thus, Tenskwatawa invoked his shamanic powers to confer with the Great Spirit, promising that the elimination of Harrison could be carried out via a nighttime assault upon the American camp. Thus, at 4 AM on the morning of November 7th, the war chiefs began their attack, having been given the blessing of their prophet. They advanced upon the American camp in a crescent formation. The right horn was made up of Kickapoos, led by Chief Mengoatoa, the left made up of Winnebagos, led by Chief Waweapakusa, and the centre made up of Potawatomis, led by Roundhead and Wabaunsi. The plan was to have the Kickapoos infiltrate the camp's northeastern corner and slay Harrison under the cover of darkness, at which point they would signal the rest of the warriors and massacre the US soldiers. This would not come to pass, for Harrison was a shrewd commander and knew well not to underestimate his native foes. Remembering all too well how 1,000 US soldiers had been massacred at the ambush at the Wabash back in 1791, he had ordered the tents in his camp to be set up in a crescent formation and for his men to sleep on top of their muskets, which were to be loaded with their bayonets affixed. The Kickapoos reached the American camp ahead of the other native contingents, crawling on the flats of their stomachs. At around 4:30 AM, they encountered an advance watchman, who managed to fire off a shot before being killed. The crack of the rifle caused the Americans to grow alert, with Harrison himself being awoken by 5:30, by which point the Kickapoos had reached the northwestern edge of the camp. At precisely 5:50, one Corporal Stephen Mars managed to train his sights on a Kickapoo warrior and shoot him dead. The presence of the natives was now known, and they had precious little time before the entire American stockade was alerted. Realizing that an assassination of Harrison was now impossible, the Kickapoos raised their weapons and charged, beginning the battle in earnest. For roughly 15 minutes, the Kickapoos kept the Americans' northwest flank in a state of chaos, killing a handful of soldiers and forcing the 4th Infantry Regiment and Kentucky Riflemen to retreat deeper into their camp. However, Harrison's foresight had paid off, as by 6 AM, all hands in the American camp were alerted and had been assembled into battle positions around the perimeter. It was around this time that the rest of the native warriors arrived on the scene, with the Potawatomis launching an assault on the northwest. The battle had devolved into a slugfest, a contest decided by numbers and firepower. In this, the natives were outmatched. As the hour progressed, the tides began to turn. A company under one Captain Snelling had driven the Potawatomis from the woods, who regrouped and assaulted the northern centre, causing a company led by Captain Robb to collapse and fall back, only to have Snelling's contingent fall in and beat back the ensuing Potawatomi advance. Meanwhile, the Winnebagos struck from the south, engaging in a fierce shootout with the companies of Captain Spencer and Warwick. This too was futile, as Rob's reformed unit arrived to reinforce their compatriots and drive off their enemy. By 7 AM, the sun was beginning to rise, and the natives realized they were outnumbered 2 to 1. Heavily demoralized, they began retreating back to Prophetstown. Here, the Americans launched a counterattack. Fully mobilized and invigorated after repelling an attack, they encircled and charged the fleeing natives, slaying a handful more before the warriors made it back behind the fortifications of Prophetstown. Upon their return, many warriors were outraged at the Prophet, for he had promised them that the Great Spirit had ensured him a victory. The powerful shaman was called out for being a fraud. Many renounced their loyalty to him and deserted Prophetstown. Tenskwatawa made desperate pleas to have them stand and fight, but they fell upon deaf ears. The next morning, the American troops marched into Prophetstown to find it had been abandoned and burned it to the ground. The Prophet, who had laid the groundwork of Tecumseh's confederacy, had lost almost all his influence. The town that served as the heart of native unity had been burned down. This was a harsh blow to the native resistance, but it was not the end. Tecumseh himself still had power, for chieftains of many tribes were still loyal to him. In the face of this setback, he was forced to turn to an old ally against the American threat, the British Empire. In the next episode, we will talk about Tecumseh's alliance with the British, his partnership with Major General Sir Isaac Brock, and the critical defence of Canada in the War of 1812. So make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.